we'll do our best. I'm Neil Irwin with the New York Times. I write about economics for a living. I'm always trying to understand the labor market, what's happening in global economy, how things are shifting. And one of the most important trends, of course, is this shift toward alternate forms of employment, toward this idea of a job where you get hired and you have a job forever and then you retire and get a gold watch is going away in a lot of ways. And what's increasingly replacing it is this independent contractor economy, the gig economy. We can call it whatever we want. We have here 3 people helping make that gig economy happen, and a couple of people with some smart thoughts about it who will have some critiques. Why don't we start with Vipul Patel of Taskrabbit, of Lyft, who runs Lyft in New York City, and tell us what you're doing at Lyft and how that affects the nature of work and the nature of what your drivers are doing.
Sure, absolutely. So first off, thanks a lot. It's great to be here. I'm the general manager of Lyft New York. I've been here since April. I think of what we do, and as it applies to the labor markets, in 2 ways. There's 2 different models. And I think New York is a paradigm of one, and a lot of what we do in the rest of the country is a paradigm of another. Both of those I don't think of as gigs. I actually do think of them as meaningful employment that is continuous and persistent in some way. But I think there's very different behaviors and motivations for drivers. In New York City, we have a regulated market for drivers. If you take an Uber or Lyft, the Taxi and Limousine Commission has regulated who can do it and what sort of process you need to go through in order to be a driver here. And as part of that, our driver population tends to be full-time drivers, but they tend to use several of the services and pick up fares from multiple. So you could get into an Uber and you could ask that driver, who else do they drive for, and there's a very good chance that driver also drives for Lyft, and vice versa if you get into a Lyft. And so it is not I don't think it's a gig model, but it is very much an independent contractor model. And I think it's sort of a true sense of a two-sided marketplace is what exists in New York, and the independent contractor model allows that to occur. Outside of New York, in unregulated markets, we also have independent contractors, but a lot of those markets tend to be places where people drive to work every day. And what we see in those markets is our peak demand very much exists on weekends, Friday night, Saturday night, and we're really happy to be providing rides during those times, making sure that people, when they go out, they're actually taking a ride home instead of driving home after being at Vars. And what we like about the independent contractor model there is the ability for people that are trying to earn a few extra dollars driving on nights and weekends to basically come online when there is peak demand, something that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do if everyone was hired full-time. So you think about the taxi driver model. That person is earning a living 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week. That's not really possible to do very well if all of your demand is concentrated on Friday night and Saturday night. And so we think the independent contractor model really makes it happen.
John Vars, the Chief Product Officer at Taskrabbit, and I'm completing different companies somehow. Same question. By the way, are we allowed to complain if our driver is not very good to you? Are you in that?
I'm sorry. To me, yes, yeah. If just let me know afterwards.
Yeah, we're up time getting home. John, same question. Tell us about how Taskrabbit, how you think about the nature of work, the nature of what the culture is.
Yeah. Whoa. Hi, everybody. So Taskrabbit, if you don't know, is a marketplace for getting things done, home services, chores, things like that, handyman, cleaning, moving help, personal assistance, things like that. So we have clients. Our clients usually have the need to get something done that they don't have time to get done, or they don't have the skills to do it, or they just don't want to do it. And then on the other side of the market, we have the taskers. And the taskers really vary. About 10% of our taskers are full-time. Some of them make up to 6 figures on the platform. We have about 50,000 taskers in total, and then after that 10%, it kind of slopes down pretty linearly in terms of how much people work. The average tasker makes $35 an hour, which is well over minimum wage. And so when we think about the future of work and the gig economy, like this panel is all about, we find that our taskers, some of them do use the platform to work full-time, as I mentioned, but many of them are looking for flexibility. They're looking for independence. They're looking to set their own schedule, to be their own boss, and our platform allows them to do that. One of my favorite stories, one of my favorite taskers is a woman who's been out of the workforce for 15 years. She was a stay-at-home mom for those years as her child grew up, and she re-enters the workforce via Taskrabbit, and she's helping pay for her years. She was a stay-at-home mom for those years as her child grew up, and she re-enters the workforce via Taskrabbit, and she's helping pay for her son to go to college. And I hire her all the time, and she's really a great tasker, and this is just her way to get back into it. So I think that there's a certain group of people that will want flexible part-time work. There's other people who have other passions in their life who want flexible part-time work, and there's other people who can really make these platforms work for them in a full-time sense. I do think that and we think at Taskrabbit that this emerging trend of flexible contractors and independent contractors is very early, and it's going to take a while for legislation to catch up. And just like I think in the 1930s the New Deal happened and we really figured out full-time employment. I think we're going through a new phase right now. We're going to have to figure out independent contractors, but it's early.
We will be coming back to that idea. Jeff Wald, tell us about Work Market, which you are a co-founder of, and how what you do fits into the forces that we were talking about.
Sure. Thank you for having us here. So we have a slightly different take on this because we're a piece of enterprise software. So our software powers the on-demand workforces of corporations like Yahoo, SAP, Omnicom, Lockheed Martin, Walgreens. They are managing their own on-demand labor assets. And this is not something that they've suddenly done, right? I would certainly agree with John. This is not a change that all of a sudden happened, right? The New York Times has been using contractors for 30 years. You may not know this, but you have an internal piece of software that your team developed 20 years ago to manage your independent contractors.
I did not know that.
It's terrible. And soon, God willing, it will be a piece of software that's amazing to help you manage your on-demand labor force. But we'll see how that plays out. Meaning the New York Times had this problem, right? I certainly also agree with John that labor regulation is the biggest impediment to a greater adoption of on-demand labor in the corporate setting. But the reality is even tiny movements of basis points in terms of the amount of labor assets that move from a full-time model to a variable model, even 5 basis points, 10 basis points, translates into tens of billions of dollars in spend. And so there's a huge amount coming into the on-demand market, but it is coming very slowly. So when we think about our software, we think about two things. We think about the ability for a corporation to engage on-demand labor at scale, do it efficiently, and we think about the ability to mitigate the risk associated with engaging on-demand labor. Because when a corporation makes this decision not only to utilize on-demand labor, but then to optimize it, which has really been our use case, they are thinking about how efficiently can I engage this on-demand labor force around the country, around the world, and they think about the risks associated with the worker misclassification, with all of the labor laws that were written in a very different time.
So Stephen Hill is the author of a book called The Raw Deal, and is a little more skeptical of this whole idea that this is a brave future we're heading into, where everyone finds work through an app, and that's their life. Tell us why you were skeptical and your reservations about this.
Well, it's true what some have said, that it's not just the gig economy, sharing economy, where started using these 1099 freelancer contractor model. You have to understand what these guys are doing in the context of the 2008-2009 economic collapse. What happened in that is that a lot of what we call the good jobs, so jobs that had decent wages, safety net, a measure of job security, a lot of those jobs went away. In this very weak recovery, a fifth of the new jobs created are temp jobs. About half of the new jobs created barely pay more than minimum wage. And a lot of these jobs don't have any safety net attached with them at all. There's no job security. So you have companies like Merck, for example, a pharmaceutical company, They had a plant in Philadelphia, sold the plant to another company. The company laid off all 400 workers, hired back all 400 workers as contractors. And by doing that, as an employer, you get out of 30% approximately of labor costs, because you, as a contractor, these guys are contractors, they don't have to pay for things like health care, Social Security, Medicare. You don't even have to pay for injured worker compensation. So you have workers working for Taskrabbit, Lyft, Uber, and others who are getting injured on the job. And they basically have no coverage at all. They have to pay for their own medical benefits, medical bills, and if they have to miss work because of the injury, they basically have to draw from their own savings. There's no injured worker compensation at all. There's no unemployment compensation, let alone paid sick leave, paid vacations, any of these sorts of things. So the incentives for the employers is clear. And when this sort of happened at a certain level in the economy, it was acceptable. There was there's arguments to be made, good arguments to be made for labor flexibility. But as more and more workers are working this way, and more workers aren't covered by a safety net, and I'm sure a lot of you in this room know exactly what I'm talking about. It not only is hard for you and hard for your families, but our economy is driven 70% by consumer spending. All capitalist economies are. If not enough people have enough wages in their pockets to buy up the goods and services being produced by the economy, you suddenly introduce ongoing recessionary forces into your economy. So there are broader macroeconomic considerations to this sort of model. So you have like Merck, you have an auto plant today. 50% of the workers working in an auto plant are temp workers. And they're working alongside other workers doing the exact same job who work for the company, but as temp workers, they're getting half the pay, they have no safety net, they have no job security. Universities say hire what's called adjunct faculty. Adjunct faculty is just a fancy name for a temp worker. They have they teach a class for this semester, and they don't even know if they're teaching the next semester. They're just a temp worker. So you have to understand what they're doing in the context of the overall economy. So now we bring in the gig economy. Well, what are these companies? In a sense, they are redesigning corporations for us. If you think about corporations in the post-World War II era, originally they were big vertical giants. Everything happened under a single roof. Production, design, marketing, research, all happened under a single roof. Then about the 1980s, companies like Nike, Apple came along. They sent production to low-wage countries, but they still kept design and marketing and these other tasks under the roof. These new companies are basically not much more than an app and a website. They have a small number of core employees that are able to use technology to oversee an army of contractors who don't have any safety net, don't have any protections, labor protections, what have you. And they, example, a company, one I think is really something to know about is like Upwork, which is based in San Francisco. You guys, I'm sure, know Upwork. They have about 250 employees. And those employees can use technology to oversee 10 million freelancers around the world. And those freelancers are people like they're architects, they're engineers, they're lawyers, they're graphic designers, they're logo designers, they're translators, they're journalists, a whole bunch of occupations and industries that are basically in an online auction. Because you can go on that website and you can see there's workers from the United States saying, oh, for this job I'd like to make $60 an hour. And then there's workers from Thailand, India, Philippines saying, I'll take $2 an hour to do the same job. And those are very highly trained workers. They have access to technology. They can deliver that product via Dropbox or emailing it, what have you. And so this is the real worrisome part, is that this technology is making it so easy to hire and fire workers. And a lot of these businesses, they want a labor force they can turn on and off like a garden hose. They need more workers, they turn the tap. The water comes out. They don't need any more workers, they turn off the tap and they get rid of those workers. And I can go through each one of these companies and show you how they fit this model. And it's not knocking these companies. I mean, they're providing some level of employment. It's better than sitting home doing nothing, I think, in most cases. But the reality is that for workers, it is increasingly a raw deal, hence the title of my book. And we have to really think more deeply about this than simply, well, I talked to my Uber driver, and he says he likes it just fine. He's making money. Well, what I say to him, ask that Uber driver how long he, and it is usually he, has been driving, because what the trend you see is that the longer they've been driving for these companies, the less they like it. Because at that point, they've gone through a couple of pay cuts, and they're used to getting reprimanded because their acceptance rate is too low. Uber cut off the platform 1,000 drivers at least, as far as we can tell, because their acceptance rate was too low. Why was their acceptance rate low? Because if you're a veteran driver, you've figured out that you don't make any money on short drives. Someone pings you to go a mile or two, and your model of like being the last mile after people take a bus or a subway conflicts with what these veteran drivers say is in their best interest, because if you're just going a mile or two, you're stuck in traffic. And you're sitting there, you're burning up fuel, you're not making any money. So if you really are the CEO of your own driving business, as Uber and I guess Lyft likes to say, and you can't refuse a ride that you know is going to cause you to lose money, this speaks to the control that the company has over the platform and over the worker, and that speaks to whether you really are a contractor or a worker.
A lot's Sean, lots
yeah.
to discuss, and
We can go into more detail.
I'm having to.
We should go into some detail, because there were a lot of details that were wrong in what you were saying, but yeah.
Real quickly, we wanted to get to everybody first. Devin Fidler is the director of the Institute for the Future. Devin, what is the future?
So I'm really, I feel quite good to follow you here. So the Institute for the Future is a 48-year-old nonprofit research center originally founded by a group of engineers who were on the ARPANET project. They were, there were 8 networked computers, and they had the realization that this is a lot bigger than the engineering. We need somewhere to look at the implications of this. So I run something called the Workable Futures Initiative. I think that so since the very beginning, the Institute's been looking at the transition to a networked economy, right, since 1968. It's very easy to kind of come down as thumbs up or thumbs down on this, but I think that, in a certain sense, the technology underlying it is inevitable, right? So if you look at what platforms actually do, kind of connecting people with work, that's what companies do too. Companies are kind of analog versions of platforms. If you're, let's say you take the Clayton Christensen kind of disruptive innovation model, right? You start with something kind of kludgy, and it ultimately grows to overtake existing systems. If you're kind of looking through that lens, it looks an awful lot like traditional organizations are the technology on the verge of disruption, right? They're a mechanism for coordinating people and resources to get things done. What these technologies offer is a kind of alternative to that. It's an alternative way as resources and individuals become digitally addressable. You can find the exact right person. You don't know that they're in X department, in X office. You know exactly kind of where your resources and where your people are. You can coordinate them in a much more kind of tight, coordinated way. So from that standpoint, what we're really interested in is what comes after this, right? What comes as these systems work their way out, and network penetration. We're projected to be at 18 billion connected objects at the end of 2018, up from 8 computers when the Institute was founded. From our standpoint, that looks an awful lot like what happens when these services start to string together. And so we've been running kind of research level programs with what we've been calling self-driving organizations. So software that can access people and resources using these platforms, bring it together, and actually kind of produce things. So we have software right now that goes on to some of the freelancing platforms, identifies people who are a probable match to each of the tasks in a workflow. The software will hire them. It will kind of bring them into the loop and coordinate the whole process, right? And out the other end of this comes say a market, kind of a market research report. This is just a different world, right? There are clear challenges, but there are also clear opportunities. It's clearly the case, for example, that in many cases the people we interact with, this is work on demand as well. This is a tap that you can turn on and kind of have work routed to you, and that's something kind of very interesting and new. So I think the challenge for the next decade is figuring out how to mitigate the real challenges that that you touch on, but also to accentuate the opportunities. Because just saying no to this, I think, like all kind of technologically driven developments in the economy, it's just not going to work.
So Jeff, before you leap over the stage, what is Stephen missing?
Well, let me start with what I agree with Stephen on, which is that there is an evolution in the labor force. The social safety net is predicated on the W-2, And as you start to see a shift away from that W-2 model, there are fundamental questions as a society that we're going to have to answer, right? Unemployment insurance, it's called, right? You have to buy into it. You don't just get it. So there are a lot of very important discussions to be had. I have a high degree of confidence in our politicians in Washington, D.C. to handle this nuanced issue with all the appropriate...
I have some bad news for you, Jeff.
Yeah, don't worry. Trump's going to fix all of this. It's all going to be great. Don't worry about it. Here's where I would draw some distinctions between what Stephen is talking about. And I would draw the distinctions between a temp worker and a freelancer, right? So the temp workers, the workers in the car plants, the workers in that Merck plant, they are getting a W-2 from somebody. They're just not getting it from Merck. They're not getting it from General Motors. So they are still paying in to Social Security. They're still paying into unemployment insurance and workman's comp. There's a big difference between that and the Uber driver, the Lyft driver, the Taskrabbit, or the people that my customers are utilizing via my platform, right? So the billions of dollars worth of work going through a company like WorkMarket, those people are supposed to be independent contractors, freelancers that are an independent business. That business is supposed to get its own workman's comp. It is supposed to set up its own self-employment retirement plan. And there are a host of policy procedures and policy incentives for them to get those programs. Not enough, right? I would love to see something like the self-employment tax be a double deduction. I would love to see a much more efficient way to get workman's comp and the other things that are required. I'd love to see an Obamacare type thing for unemployment insurance where people could buy into it. But those are very, very discrete issues. And when you talk about the freelance economy, you're talking about basis points in the entire economy. The temp economy is much bigger, but the temp economy doesn't pose nearly as many challenges. And the regulations around that really are only coming to bear in co-employment, meaning is Merck also responsible for that person that's in its plant, not just Adecco or Randstad or Kelly or whoever is giving them the W-2. So there are big distinctions between the temp market and the freelance market, and if we're going to have a conversation about that, we need to understand that the temp market is massive, and that is what's driving the on-demand variabilization in the corporate economy, in the economy at large, and the freelance portion is incredibly, incredibly small. And if we were to look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the amount of W-2s versus 1099s that have been issued since this bifurcation in 2008, where you had a decoupling, right? It used to be the temp economy moved counter-cyclically with the regular economy. When the economy was good, the temp market was bad. When the economy was bad, the temp market was good. They decoupled in 08. But the number of 1099s that have been issued to the American worker has not substantially increased. Therefore, the number of people in the freelance economy has not substantially increased. The number of W-2s has increased. So there are a host of different issues that we need to really think about, but I certainly agree that there are fundamental problems that we as a society will have to address, because you cannot allow these workers to not have the protections that they want. You have to give them an efficient way to get them.
Is there, John, is there a path forward for workers who are in a kind of freelance situation to have retirement benefits, to have, I guess there's Obamacare for health, there's
Sure.
all kinds of worker protections. What is possible?
So first of all, I'll just say, I think we have important points of view that all need to be put on the table, because like I said earlier, it is early. So I appreciate all the different sides here. I think, TaskRabbit, if we look at our micro world, like not thinking about the big macroeconomic picture, but just thinking about like our taskers. We care a lot about them. We want them to be successful. We want our clients to be successful. We want our business to be successful. We all want to be aligned. In fact, we won't take a penny of any job if anyone's not feeling like it was a good outcome. But we also would like to help our taskers develop their careers or have that safety net, and we can't do it. If you look at the Department of Labor, they have like 12 points that are very vague in terms of what designates an employee versus a contractor. And every time that we want to do something like either train a tasker with a skill that they could take with them onto their next job, or we want to provide some benefit, our lawyers say, actually, that would start to indicate a employee relationship. Don't go there because it's just really vague right now. It's better just to stay clear of that stuff. So we're really you know, I agree with a lot of what you say. I mean, we talked a lot last night, and there's a ton of common ground.
Employed or they're gig lawyers? I'm curious.
Sorry?
Your lawyers, are they employed or they're freelancers?
Is our lawyer employed or a freelance? We actually get them from this website. It's a two-sided marketplace for lawyers. Just kidding. We actually
Rate them on a 1 to 5 star scale at the end.
you got to rate them. They do exist. Our lawyer is employed, full-time employee. But anyways, the point is, it's hard, even if you have the good intention to want to provide benefits and that safety net. It's hard to provide them right now. So what we've been, and many people have been asking for, is some sort of safe haven or timeout, so that companies like ours can try some of these things and see how it might work.
So I think you were joking about a two-sided marketplace, but just to emphasize, we do very much think of our business model as a marketplace. And I think the good part of that is it really requires us to compete for drivers. And that forces us to treat them very well. There's certain things we don't do. We don't provide benefits. They're very much independent contractors. But we don't think of this as wage slavery. We think of it as competing for the time of our drivers and providing rides for them. And that happens for certain drivers. They are deciding to drive for us for the next month versus Uber. Some drivers are on the other end of the spectrum, deciding ride to drive for us versus Uber. And I think that does enforce a very sort of healthy level of competition and degree of regard for the drivers. Just to emphasize it once more, I mean, the way we think about it, we don't even use the word customer within Lyft because there's two sorts of customers that we have, and so we only use passenger and driver because it's very much, I would say half of our focus goes towards attracting drivers and make sure they stay on board.
So Stephen, is there a case for not just with freelance type arrangements, but more broadly in the economy, trying to separate more of these kind of social safety net benefits from employment? I mean, it is a little weird in the U.S. that my 401k is through my employer, my health plan is through my employer. Why should that be through the employer rather than kind of my own arrangement? Is there a case for rethinking those arrangements to begin with?
Yeah, and there already was before the gig economy. So in some ways, the gig economy is forcing us to confront a problem that was already there. In my book, I have 2 chapters on what do we do? How do we transform our current economy so it works in the digital economy? And basically, it boils down to creating what's called a portable safety net, so that you as a worker, no matter where you work or who you work for, whether you're a regularly employed worker, part-time, full-time, whether you're a freelance, contractor, temp, that business would pay into what's called an individual security account for you. And they would pay a certain amount above the wage that is prorated to the number of hours that you work for this business. And then what's in your individual security account can be used to purchase your safety. It would go into existing infrastructure. So some of it would go to a health care plan through maybe Obamacare. Some of it would go to Medicare, Social Security. It would go into an injured worker fund that's already there because the state has set it up. It would go to unemployment because, I mean, you mentioned that workers need to get these things, but they don't, as an individual, you cannot really buy your own unemployment insurance. The economy wasn't set up for these sorts of workers. And so it is a matter of pivoting a lot of this in a way that would allow you as a worker to work however you want, whether because you like flexibility or you just can't get a better job, and each business would contribute into this individual security account. I mean, it seems to me that other countries are already doing these sorts of things. It works. It's just U.S. is kind of an outlier in a lot of these ways. So. I mean, that's just one example of the types of things, and there's specific ones we could do for Uber and Lyft, as well as for Airbnb. There's specific things I think we can regulate these in a way that will make them safe for our neighborhoods and safe for workers. But we're not there yet, and we can't even get to that point of the conversation because there's so much Silicon Valley happy talk about this is all great and you're going to love it, and everybody's going to be a win-win, and I'm going to make $1 billion. What could be wrong? This is kind of the level of the conversation. So people like me come in and sort of like, the skunk at the party, scaring everybody. But I really do think that we can regulate these things in a way that would get the good, keep the good that's there, and would help to mitigate some of the real problems that we see emerging with these sorts of ways of working.
I mean, do any of you hear kind of appetite for that kind of thinking at political level, coming from your own companies?
I mean, we're definitely involved in these conversations, revolving around these types of protections or ways that you could think about things differently. I think the problem right now is, as I see it, is a lot of this stuff is progressing through court cases, through class action and things like that, and it really needs to be solved through legislation. And that just takes a really long time. Like you were saying, your confidence currently in the political system is low. So
That's not what he said. He said he's very confident.
okay. Yeah.
I mean, if we had to go through Congress to do this, good luck. But we actually could do this at the local and state level. So you have city councils all across the country where you have more progressive legislators there. You have, so-called blue states where, there are legislators where you have a chance to pass this. In San Francisco, for example, we already have every business has to either pay for health care for your worker, or you have to contribute into a health care account for that worker that allows them to purchase their own health care. So all this is doing the exact same thing and just expanding it to other components of the safety net. And the businesses, you might say, well, this is going to make the businesses less competitive because it'll drive up their costs. You have to pay into these individual security accounts. No, if you require all the businesses to do it, then no business is hurt more than any other business.
So
And it's really creating a pool of social insurance. And with any insurance, you always pass the costs on to the biggest pool possible, which is consumers. So the business will be able to pass the costs on to consumers. Price will go up a little bit. It's not going to drive inflation that much, and we need inflation in our economy right now, actually. And so these workers would be able to, a lot of the people who are paying the extra costs would be the very workers who are gaining from this. We have 40 million private sector workers in the United States, outside the gig economy and in the gig economy, that have no paid sick leave. 40 million private sector workers with no paid sick leave. So these workers deserve it and have deserved it for a long time.
So we've been very involved in these discussions, and so I have a slightly different point of view. What's interesting is every single time somebody sues Lyft or something, all I know is that our sales cycle just got pushed out a month, right? Because every single head of HR and every single person at legal, I'm blaming you, all of a sudden gets all freaked out. Oh my God, what's going to happen? What I would say, Stephen, is that I don't think that municipalities can act in this because nobody really knows who the trier of fact is, right? You have 50 different state departments of labor, you have 50 different state workers' comp board, 50 different state unemployment insurance, you have the 12 different circuit courts, you have the IRS, you have the Department of Labor. Each one of them has a very different guideline for what an employee is, right? Those jurisdiction lines are not clear to anybody. I don't disagree with you in regards to portability. What I would say is the conversations that we've had with senators, with governors that are thinking about this, the conversations we've had with different Congress people has been around, look, the changes here are too difficult. You're talking about a fundamental change to our social safety net, the fundamental contract of society. Can we just amend existing legislation? Can you take the 37 Act? Can you take the FICA Act? Can you take the FLSA and just amend them to include any type of labor? The ability for San Francisco to do something, sure, San Francisco can take an action that will not stop the state from taking a different action, that will not stop the IRS from taking a different action, that will not stop the Federal Department of Labor from taking a different action. So just because San Francisco does something doesn't mean that it gives comfort to any employer.
You don't have to change the classification of employee because that is a federal classification. What we're talking about is it doesn't matter what your classification of employee is. Regardless, that business will still pay into this individual security account. So that's the beauty of it. You get past all the lawsuits. You don't have to go into litigation to settle this stuff.
It's America. You're never going to get past the lawsuits.
Well, on this case, like the Uber lawsuit and what have you, you get past that lawsuit by just simply giving all the workers. Now, I understand the safe harbor issue that has to be thought through. That we've talked about. That you guys are afraid this will make you look like an employer, and so I think the legislation would have to be constructed in a way that gives you that safe harbor. That may be a challenge because of federal law, but I've talked to labor lawyers. They think we can do this at the local and state level.
Let's go a little bigger picture. Devin, you talk about the nature of the firm, the nature of what does a company consist of in a world where it doesn't consist of the X thousand people who come to work and clock in every morning and go home. How does this affect what a company is, what a business is?
Right. One of the things we were talking about backstage is the sort of famous paper by Ronald Coase that defines why we have firms, called The Nature of the Firm. And basically the argument is that transaction costs between people each time they work together mount up, and that once they get to a certain point, it's more worthwhile for me to come under the same roof as you and be in the same kind of organization in order to get things done. You add kind of Moore's law and the ability to, kind of really precisely identify people and resources to Coase's thinking, and really weird stuff starts to happen. You start to, in all reality, it starts to look like a lot of the sort of formalized structures of firms that we're very familiar with are kind of, they were a coordination technology for back when bureaucracy was, kind of the means of coordination, right? So what we've been working on, we had an HBR article written up last year about kind of using software instead to, kind of identify these resources, which are now indexed, right? The great thing about platforms is that they give a beautiful digital address to, kind of all of these workers looking for work, all of these, kind of other resources. As it moves, kind of increasingly from B2C, where it's, I think the center of gravity still is, into more the B2B and production space, you start to see, software programs that are able to pull together resources and really produce things, and we have prototypes of this now. For me, that's a bit scary and a bit exciting, but the opportunity to systematically identify and maximize kind of human potential is is something that's really kind of a real possibility out of systems like this, because human potential becomes the kind of the natural resource that these systems are trying to identify and trying to pull in, and this is the sort of primordial soup that's coming out of, right? Like in 10 years, these platforms will look very different, and I think as we have conversations like this, it's worth keeping in mind that this is a moving target, and it's sort of moving in a kind of far more integrated direction, and that kind of as these networks reach out further and further, these things become real possibilities.
So Devin, it's very interesting because you talked about B2C being the driver, because it's very easy for me as an individual to say, you know what, I don't want to have a car. I'm just going to utilize Lyft. I'm not going to stay at a hotel. I'll go in and stay at an Airbnb. Don't underestimate, right, and I appreciate you were making this point as well, the difficulty for Pepsi to make that decision in terms of some sort of business process, right? That is a decade-long decision because it involves HR, it involves legal, it involves business processes that need to be disaggregated, reaggregated back at the source, and that is a very, very complicated movement. And so while I would love nothing more than a sea change coming in corporate America where they were freelancing everything and variabilizing their entire labor force, it's just not happening.
Something that Stephen referenced early on that I kind of wonder what your view is. How much of the ability of Taskrabbit and Lyft and these alternate forms of work to emerge has been a function of this weak economy and high unemployment rate coming out of the recession? I mean, as we head toward stronger economy, lower unemployment, is that shifting the terms of these agreements? Are your taskers and your drivers, do they have more leverage than they did? Is that changing the underlying economics of these businesses?
I can take the first stab on it. So I think of our labor pool as there's two parts, and one is in cities like New York, they're full-time drivers. They've always been freelancers, independent contractors in some form. If anything, I think we provided them a greater degree of independence. If you talk to a yellow cab driver 2-3 years ago, they were driving under a medallion that they leased. That medallion cost, if you were to acquire it, $1.2 million. You lease that medallion for $1,000 a week. And so basically your week of driving is digging yourself out of a hole of having paid $1,000. The model now, you still need to get your car, but you're not paying $1,000 up front. Instead, you're paying a commission on each ride. So it's actually providing some greater degree of freedom. But the general model between who is it that sort of owns some greater degree of sort of control the CLO cab company or the medallion. That was still very much an independent contractor relationship. Outside of New York City, where you have drivers that are driving a few hours a week, it hasn't. It's not like there's been a change of relationship. It's probably more likely a more entirely new relationship. It's people that didn't used to drive. They probably still have their jobs, or maybe they decided to choose a different profession. But this is giving them some greater economic liberty because they're getting extra money from this gig on the side.
John, how's a tighter economy affecting?
So Taskrabbit was founded in 2008 at sort of the bottom of the collapse there, the Great Recession. And also, coincidentally, was the time when the iPhone had just come out. So these two factors really helped kick us off. And I do think a lot of probably that state of the economy led to our early success in getting some traction. I think now it's not really a factor. I think we've reached a certain scale and the economy has changed and everything has changed, where I think the people who are coming to our platform are really these people, like I mentioned earlier, are people who value flexibility over the safety net, over having a full-time job. They value that flexibility and that choice and that agency in their lives. I don't know at a societal level if that's a good thing. Like, we probably do need safety nets because, if it's an on-demand economy, and it goes off, that's not a great thing for all of us. And I do think, inequality is just like you mentioned earlier. If there's no one who can afford to consume anymore, that's a real problem. But I don't think that we have 15,000 people who just organically apply to be a tasker every month, and that's never changed. It's pretty constant.
Well, we're out of time. I'm happy to say in less than an hour we've solved the entire problems of the safety net in a gig economy. Obviously, these are super important issues that are going to continue to be interesting debates and interesting things as both companies and workers and politicians try to solve. So thank you, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. That was pretty intense. I had the fire marshal on notice ready. Thank you. Maybe that's what happens when you put all men on a panel. It gets kind of aggro.